Okay, so for decades, right, whenever you thought about India and Pakistan, um, the friction, it always sort of boiled down to one place, didn't it?
Yeah.
The line of control in Jammu and Kashmir.
Absolutely. That was the image, wasn't it? That physical standoff, soldiers, bunkers, that constant, tense watch along that really rugged border.
Yeah, a very tangible thing. You could picture it.
Exactly. And that landscape, it's harsh but also incredibly beautiful in places. That's been the stage for this whole conflict really since 1947. You think of the barbed wire, the watchtowers.
The stories of infiltrators under moonlight.
Precisely. It was very much about, well, boots on the ground, kinetic action, physical presence.
But what's become super clear, looking at everything you've shared, is that now, in 2025, that whole picture, it's fundamentally changed. The core of the conflict isn't primarily about that physical border anymore. Something's really shifted.
And that is the absolute key point, isn't it? The real action, the main thrust, it's moved. We're now seeing this conflict playing out in completely new arenas, places that are much less visible, non-kinetic areas that go way beyond that traditional line on the map. They're calling them, the new battlegrounds.
Right. So that's what we need to unpack in this deep dive, using all the information we've got to really get our heads around this shift. How is terrorism actually evolving? What's Pakistan's role in all this, which seems, frankly, quite complex, often contradictory?
And how India's responding, how they're adapting.
Exactly, because we've definitely found some surprising turns, some significant changes here that, well, you'll want to know about.
Okay, let's get into it.
All right, so let's start with that familiar scene, the Lopasai. It was the flashpoint for, well, generations. We all have that mental image, don't we? The soldiers, the fortifications, the constant underlying tension.
Yeah, that physical border really did define the conflict for so long. But the first thing that jumps out now is that while it's still there, it's still guarded, it's just not where the main event is anymore.
And there seems to be a pretty solid reason why, especially for those larger traditional infiltration groups. India has seriously beefed up its defenses along the low sea.
Oh, massively. We're talking significantly better fencing, constant drone surveillance, eyes in the sky, practically 204/7, and just really intense patrolling on the ground.
Right. The analysis clearly shows this ramped up, this counter-infiltration grid has made it incredibly hard to cross physically, especially for larger groups.
The data backs that up. Those big infiltration attempts that used to happen fairly regularly, they've apparently dropped to just a trickle. Getting across that physical line now is just, well, exponentially more difficult.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling. The threat hasn't gone away. It's just relocated, found a new address, maybe one that's right in your pocket on your phone.
Yeah, it's moved into cyberspace, onto social media, and crucially, into people's minds, into the human psyche itself.
And this is where we get to the heart of this transformation, right? The rise of non-kinetic warfare.
Yeah.
It's a totally different playbook,
Yeah.
much sneakier in a way than a physical attack.
Definitely. It's not about soldiers crossing a line with guns anymore.
No, the weapons themselves have changed. We're talking propaganda, misinformation, radicalization.
Yeah.
These are the primary tools now.
And the way this actually works is, well, it's both clever and deeply disturbing. You can imagine a young person, maybe nowhere near Kashmir, just scrolling on their phone.
Right.
They're on encrypted apps, maybe Telegram, WhatsApp, and they're getting hit with this slickly produced content, videos, messages, all designed to, glorify violence, push extremist ideas, basically twist their view of reality.
So they don't need a physical training camp anymore or to sneak across the border.
Not necessarily. Someone could be sitting in a safe house, maybe in Rawalpindi, maybe in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and they can radicalize someone completely remotely. We saw it described as ordering chaos online with free delivery. It's like terrorism by remote control.
Terrorism by remote control. That really captures it. And this new approach, it seems to have really taken hold after 2019, after India changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir.
That's when we really see this figure emerge, what's being called the hybrid terrorist. And they're not like the militants we might picture from the past.
How so?
Well, typically these are local youth. Often they have no previous criminal record, no history with militancy. They're recruited and radicalized almost entirely online.
So no need for the physical camps, no need to cross the low sea themselves.
Yes, exactly. And they're handlers. They're virtual. They might be operating from Poke or Rawalpindi. But we're also seeing signs of coordination from further away way, places like the UAE, even the UK sometimes, they're using digital tools to orchestrate attacks without needing to be anywhere near the actual location.
Okay, but what about Pakistan's official role, or the deep state, as it's often called? Is it still pulling the strings? The picture seems murky.
It is murky. The deep state, elements within the military, the intelligence services, they certainly seem to be stirring the pot, providing ideological fuel, maybe some logistical support in these new ways. But it's probably not simple top-down control anymore.
Meaning?
Well, you've got other factors, global jihadist networks that have their own agendas. Then there's Pakistan's own internal situation. The economy is in terrible shape. The political scene is chaotic. All this means the state's control probably isn't as absolute as it might once have been assumed. It's a messier picture.
Less predictable.
Exactly. Less predictable than pure state sponsorship might suggest.
But they still seem very quick to use that plausible deniability strategy, don't they? Shrugging off responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. Even while we see things like weapons and narcotics being dropped by drones into places like Punjab and Jammu. It's a stark reminder, really.
That even with the shift online,
there are still physical supply lines, physical actions happening. They're just using new methods like drones that are harder to trace back directly.
right.
It's a complex game they're playing.
It feels almost surreal sometimes. And this whole new dynamic, this blend of digital and physical, tragically came into sharp focus with that attack in Pahalgam, April 22nd, 2025.
Yeah, that was just horrific. Gunmen opening fire on tourists. In Pahalgam, of all places, usually such a scenic, peaceful resort town.
And the casualties were staggering. 26 people killed, mostly Hindu visitors, according to reports, and over a dozen more injured. One of the deadliest attacks targeting civilians in years.
The group that claimed it, the Resistance Front, is widely seen as basically a front for Lashkar-e-Taiba, which has known links back to Pakistan.
So India's reaction was immediate, pointing the finger straight at Pakistan, saying they had evidence of cross-border connections.
And Pakistan's response? Pretty much by the book, based on past patterns, denial, calling for a neutral and transparent probe.
You always have to wonder what neutral means in that context.
Quite. But India's response, Operation Sindoor on May 7th, showed this mix of strategies. It wasn't a ground fight at the border.
No, it was missile strikes. Precision strikes targeting what India identified as terrorist infrastructure across the Lassi.
They reported hitting 9 sites. Places like Muzaffarabad, Bahawalpur, Muridike locations allegedly linked to groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen.
Pakistan reported casualties from these strikes, 31 deaths, they said, mostly civilians. They called it an act of war.
India counters strongly, saying they only hit terror hubs, specifically avoiding military or civilian areas, and they issued a very clear warning against any Pakistani escalation.
And the name itself, Sindoor. That's powerful symbolism, the red vermilion powder worn by married Hindu women.
A very direct, poignant reference to the victims of the Pahalgam attack, implying many wives lost their husbands.
So the message India was sending was complex, wasn't it?
Very. On one hand, framed as measured, responsible, trying not to escalate into full-blown war. But on the other hand, an absolutely clear signal. We will hit back, and hit back hard against attacks orchestrated from your soil.
And Prime Minister Modi was quite blunt, warning against nuclear blackmail, vowing to hunt down terrorists wherever they hide.
Pakistan made counterclaims too, of course. Their PM initially said they'd shot down multiple Indian jets. Though the details later seemed less clear, India confirmed fewer losses with uncertain causes. Pakistan's military also reported its own casualties from clashes around that time, 11 killed, 78 wounded.
Then the U.S. stepped in, brokered a ceasefire on May 10th to try and cool things down.
Which, unfortunately, didn't seem to hold perfectly. We saw reports almost immediately of Pakistani shelling along the Lotsi and the international border, just highlighting how fragile any calm really is.
So Operation Sindoor was this very visible, very kinetic response. But it also highlights that the ongoing fight, the perhaps more significant one day to day, is happening elsewhere.
Absolutely. Back to that digital battlefield. That's arguably the real game changer here.
Pakistan's deep state, or elements within it, seem to have really doubled down on using the digital space. Social media, encrypted apps.
Not just for recruitment anymore, but for massive propaganda campaigns. Someone described it pretty vividly as swapping suicide vests for viral videos.
That's quite a shift. And these platforms, they're ideal for spreading extremist ideas, distorted narratives, making violence seem appealing or justified.
And it's not just aimed at Kashmir. They're actively targeting the diaspora 2 communities in the UK, the UAE, elsewhere. trying to stir dissent abroad.
And this online stuff has real-world consequences, doesn't it? Like that protest in London, April 26, outside the Pakistan High Commission.
Exactly. You had Indian diaspora groups protesting Pakistan-backed terror, then Pakistani counter-protesters clashing with them.
And then that incident with the Pakistani official.
Yeah, making that throat-slitting gesture while holding a poster mocking the captured Indian pilot, Abhinandan Varthaman. Just incredibly provocative.
India declared him persona non grata after that. But it's like a small snapshot of this bigger battle, this war of narratives that's playing out online and sometimes spilling over physically.
So what's India's counter-strategy online? It must be incredibly difficult.
It is. They've invested heavily in cyber surveillance units, trying to track online radicalization, intercept communications, disrupt these networks.
But it sounds like that whack-a-mole problem you mentioned. You shut one thing down.
And two more pop up somewhere else. It's relentless. Countering this kind of propaganda isn't just about blocking websites or accounts. It needs a really sophisticated long-term approach, shaping alternative narratives, building community resilience online. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And alongside the cyber battle, India's also launched a major diplomatic offensive, hasn't it?
Yeah, especially after Pahalgam. Parliamentary delegations fanned out to over 30 countries, everywhere from Qatar to Brazil, across Latin America.
Carrying what kind of message?
A pretty strong one. We saw quotes from people like the Lok Sabha Speaker, Om Birla, at the BRICS Forum, directly calling out Pakistan for not dismantling terror networks, and Shashi Tharoor, in Latin America, publicly asking how Pakistan can claim innocence while clearly harboring known terrorists.
Did it have an impact?
Some countries like the UK and Qatar did condemn the Pahalgam attack specifically and backed India's stance against terror.
But Pakistan's pushing back diplomatically too, presumably.
Of course, demanding international probes, painting themselves as the victim of Indian aggression. And the reactions from the big global players? Well, they've been mixed.
How so?
The U.S. has mostly stayed hands-off, called for de-escalation, a neutral probe, but stopped short of strongly condemning Pakistan over the attack links. China, predictably silent on the attack itself, while still blocking efforts at the UN to designate Masood Azhar, the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief, as a global terrorist.
So it's a complex diplomatic picture.
You could call it a diplomatic circus, maybe? Everyone playing their own angles.
And then there was India's move regarding the Indus Waters Treaty. That sounded like a big deal.
It was a significant signal.
Yeah.
PM Modi hinting at potentially reconsidering water that's absolutely vital for Pakistan. It's India saying, look, we have other ways to apply pressure if this terrorism continues.
But that's a risky play, surely. Water is such a sensitive issue.
Hugely risky. It could easily destabilize things even further. And it all happens under that ever-present nuclear shadow, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Modi might talk tough about nuclear blackmail, but the fact remains, both sides have nuclear weapons, which raises the stakes of every single move.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. Away from the international stage, back to the home front in India. That effort to counter radicalization itself.
Right. This feels like maybe the most critical front, even if it's less glamorous than missile strikes or diplomacy. It's about hearts and minds, especially in Kashmir.
What does that involve on the ground?
Well, reports suggest significant investment in working with local communities, engaging local clergy, civil society groups, community leaders, working through mosques, schools, even using local social media influencers.
Trying to build resilience from the ground up.
Exactly. Pushing back against extremist narratives, promoting peace, offering alternative pathways. But the challenge is enormous, particularly because of this hybrid terrorist profile we talked about.
The ones radicalized online.
Yes. They often don't fit the old stereotypes. They might seem perfectly normal, integrated into the community. They're incredibly hard to spot before something happens. It could be anyone.
Which must put immense pressure on intelligence agencies.
Absolutely. They're using AI, data analytics, all sorts of advanced tools, but it's still this constant, incredibly difficult cat-and-mouse game. Securing the physical law and sea was one thing.
Securing the digital border is a whole different ballgame.
And we shouldn't forget, amidst all this focus on digital, those drone drops, weapons, drugs into Punjab and Jammu, it's a constant reminder that Pakistan hasn't entirely abandoned physical means. They're just adapting, changing the rules, finding ways to keep assets in play.
So wrapping this up, what we've really uncovered here looking at 2025 is a fundamental shift. The front lines of the India-Pakistan conflict are now just as much digital, psychological, ideological, and diplomatic
As they are kinetic, like with Operation Sindoor. India is being forced to adapt its entire strategy, fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously.
And it seems, despite its internal issues, Pakistan's deep state remains pretty resilient, pretty adept at this proxy warfare game. They haven't quit. They've just, as you said, swapped bullets for bytes, largely.
It also raises broader questions, doesn't it, about the international community's role?
It does. Simply calling for de-escalation feels insufficient sometimes. There's a long, well-documented history of Pakistan providing safe havens for terrorist groups.
And the analysis often suggests that global powers sometimes look the other way, perhaps for their own strategic reasons.
But if the world genuinely wants to tackle terrorism effectively, surely holding state sponsors accountable has to be part of the equation, even if it's politically difficult. Geopolitics is messy, we know that.
So, pulling it all together then, the key takeaway: the India-Pakistan conflict in 2025 looks fundamentally different. It's being fought in the shadows online, in mines, through propaganda, diplomacy, just as much, if not more, than at the physical border.
India is responding across the board. Securing the Lost Sea physically, showing kinetic capability like with Operation Sindoor, pushing hard diplomatically, investing in counter-radicalization at home, and constantly trying to upgrade its cyber defenses.
While Pakistan adapts its tactics, cultivating these hybrid terrorists, using drones for supply, refining its digital influence operations.
It's this continuous, dangerous cycle of adaptation on both sides. And looking at it all laid out like this, it's just a stark reminder of how incredibly fragile peace is there and the devastatingly high cost of this conflict in all its evolving forms.
So maybe something for you to think about as you go about your day, maybe scrolling through your own phone. How can any society effectively counter radicalization and fight misinformation when the battlefield itself is becoming increasingly invisible? When it's happening right there, on the devices we carry with us everywhere, and what's our own role as individuals in navigating this new landscape of information warfare? Definitely something to mull over.